A few days ago, on April 29th, Michael Barbaro interviewed Debra Kamin, the New York Times real estate reporter, on the Daily podcast. The interview was titled, "The Housing Market Has New Rules. Realtors Are Evading Them." Not only do I take issue with the title of the show, I take issue with every point made throughout the podcast. The information painting real estate agents as controlling and greedy was offensive and untrue. The first point states that the NAR settlement was supposed to lower the price of buying and selling a home across the country. The lawsuit was not about lowering prices for consumers. It was about having transparency in real estate commissions. Sellers sued over sellers paying the listing agent commission and the buyer agent commission. The rules coming out of the suit gave sellers the option moving forward to either pay buyer's agents no commission, a fixed dollar amount, or a percentage of the purchase price. How is this supposed to lower prices? If sellers choose not to compensate a buyer's agent and prices are based on comparable sales with commissions included, sellers want to take advantage of the higher price when in reality they should be adjusting prices down by removing the buyer agent commission. If a buyer then has to pay their agent because the seller isn't compensating, you need to add that into the price, and buyers are either paying the same price as if the seller were paying for the commission, or the buyer would actually be paying more. They would pay twice, the higher price and an additional amount for their agent. What was earth-shattering and a watershed moment is that no one knew how it would play out regarding sellers paying or not paying a commission. And as realtors, we had to deal with the commission information no longer being displayed in the MLS, which is our primary means of communicating with each other. There was fear in the realtor community that selling agents would be flooded with calls from realtors and buyers to find out if the seller was compensating and how much. The sea change was whether sellers would compensate buyer agents, and if not, how buyers would react, and were buyer agents going to be cut out of the transaction because buyers didn't want to pay an agent separately. It is important to understand that the way that the system worked, the commission was baked into the purchase price. The other very important point is that sellers may have thought that they were overpaying, but they wouldn't have had the money to pay either commission without the buyer purchasing the house. If you remove the buyer agent commission from the seller's side of the transaction, the buyer either increases their loan amount or pays the commission out of pocket. I am going to say this again. The lawsuit was not about lowering prices. The price of a home is based on recent sales of similar homes. Why would you think that prices would come down just because sellers have the choice of paying a buyer agent commission or not? Ms. Kamin made reference to this hinging on realtors following the rules. I would like to know exactly what rule she's referring to that would have lowered prices. Here are the rules. No MLS in the country is allowed to display a buyer agent commission. Commission information can go anywhere else but the MLS. It could go on a website, on a listing flyer, or on a for sale sign. Buyer agency agreements must be signed before showing a property in person or virtually. In North Carolina, our buyer agency agreement did not change because we have practiced buyer agency since its inception. The reason why buyer agency agreements must be signed in advance is that buyers need to know that sellers have a choice to compensate a buyer's agent or not. We always first seek to get the compensation from the seller. But if the seller is not compensating, then the buyer will need to either pay the commission agreed to between the buyer and their agent, or make up the difference between that negotiated amount and anything offered by the seller. The last thing that changed is our listing agreement. Now it is very transparent that the seller has the choice to compensate a buyer's agent with either a flat fee or a percentage of the purchase price or nothing. The lawsuit was not about the listing agent not getting paid their commission, and commissions have always been negotiable. If the listing agent does not want to reduce their commission, the seller doesn't need to hire that agent. The suit was about giving sellers the choice to compensate a buyer's agent or not. In North Carolina's listing agreement, there is now a place for the listing agent's commission, a place for the buyer's agent commission, and a place for the total dollar figure of both commissions. It is extremely transparent to the seller what the total commission will be. So let's talk about the quote unquote dreaded 6%. In North Carolina, at least here in the Triangle, our commissions are more typically 5% and sometimes less. And buyer agents may get 3%, 2.5%, and very often it's 2.4%. Remember, the seller would not have the money to pay the commission without the buyer purchasing the house. The buyer really is paying their part of the commission. But it just doesn't feel that way. It's baked into the purchase price. And if it's overwhelming when a seller is talking to a listing agent, then have multiple conversations. It is and can be very overwhelming. My listing appointments typically last 3 hours. There's a lot to review. Don't just take an agent's word for it if it's not clear. Make sure you understand things. Ask again and again and again. It's okay. That is what the agent is there for. You need to understand all of the rules and your rights as a seller. It is important to note that in my market, sellers are choosing, hear my words, they are choosing to continue to compensate buyer agents. We must have the commission discussion with our sellers. It is in black and white in the listing agreement. If the market wasn't challenging, maybe they would choose not to compensate. But because the market is getting worse every day, sellers are compensating. If Ms. Kamin's concern is that the sellers are still compensating, the problem is with the outcome of the lawsuit. The lawsuit left it up to the sellers to determine whether they want to compensate a buyer's agent or not. If you want to cut the cord, the rule should have been that sellers compensate their agent and buyers compensate their agent. Because the settlement didn't do this, it has made it more complicated and confusing to realtors, and most of us are doing the best that we can do with a difficult situation. Debra states, quote, "This settlement was meant to shake up the system of how those commissions are determined and how they are paid." This might be true, but it left the decision to sellers, and most sellers are opting to compensate. Realtors aren't twisting sellers' arms to compensate buyer agents. We can offer a recommendation, but it is the seller's choice. The only way to truly shake things up would have been to take the seller's choice away. As an aside, after the settlement, I surveyed my clients to see how they felt about this. Did they think having the choice was good, or did they prefer to have the choice removed and each party compensate their own agent? Much to my surprise, my clients overwhelmingly voted for choice. I want to make another point about realtor commissions. Yes, this is how we get paid. There are very few professions where you work for free until you're sitting at the closing table. People always want us to give up a part of our livelihood. I have a question for both Michael and Debra. If your editors came to you with a story that they wanted you to cover, but they wanted to pay you half as much for the same amount of work, would you do the work? How would you react? And how would it make you feel? There's a saying in real estate, and it's a good one. If a realtor is fast to give up their commission, will they treat the negotiations on your behalf the same way? Don't you want to work with the strong agent who knows how to protect themselves? They'll protect you the same way. The reporters seem to have this understanding that if the commission goes down, that this translates into lower home prices. This is just not true. If the home price happens to be lower because the seller isn't paying a buyer agent commission, the only way that that price is going to stay lower is if the buyer chooses not to have representation. If they have a buyer's agent, the buyer will need to pay their agent and combine this with the purchase price, and the home and the prices have not gone down. They've stayed the same. Another question I have is, do you want buyers to be unrepresented? Please watch the video that I did on why buyer agency started in the first place. It also was due to a class action lawsuit because buyers had no representation under the law. Well, now they do, and buyer agents protect buyers' interests every day. The issue is who should actually make that payment, the seller or the buyer, and what should the sales price be? You have to add in the commission paid by the buyer to the sales price to know the true price paid by the buyer. I was and am insulted that Debra Kamin thinks realtors are doing a workaround to not change the system. The system has changed, and it is up to buyers and sellers to negotiate with their agent. If an agent does not want to negotiate, they don't have to. The seller or buyer can move on to the next agent. Realtors are licensed professionals who deserve to be compensated for their expertise and the services that they provide. Again, the only way to really shake things up would be to sever the cord and say that buyers and sellers have to pay their own agents. In other countries, this is how it's done. Listing agents list properties and buyers go directly to the listing agents. They can choose to hire a buyer's agent, and most choose not to do that. It's very difficult to get comparable sales, and usually inspections aren't done. This approach has not changed prices for buyers, not at all. Ms. Kamin goes on to say, quote, moving forward, post-settlement, the rules that the sellers pay their own agents and buyers pay their own agents. If you work with the real estate agents, it's up to you to pay them. That was what was supposed to happen, which should have brought a lot more competition and negotiation into the marketplace, unquote. This could not be further from the truth. All the settlement did was remove the buyer agent commission from the MLS. We have to have a buyer agency agreement in writing before we show property in person or virtually. And we have to review the listing agreement with the seller and explain that they have a choice of compensating a buyer's agent or not. In North Carolina, we have another new form called the compensation agreement. This is the form that listing agents provide to buyer's agents that show if the seller is compensating a buyer's agent and how much. The lawsuit did not say that sellers will compensate their agent and buyers will compensate their agent. The lawsuit is far more complicated than this, and agents are not doing an end run to avoid the rules. Agents are doing everything that they can to comply, because if they don't, their license could be revoked. To insinuate that the head of NAR was telling realtors to work around the rules is insulting. You don't understand the new rules. It is correct that buyer agent commissions can no longer be in the MLS, but we can put the information anywhere else. We're allowed to do this. We are supposed to communicate, and sellers are still allowed to compensate. And this has to be communicated somehow. I would like to know what you suggest. We are not allowed to communicate anything through the MLS. So listing photos with 3 cookies on the table is a big reach and clearly a no-no. My guess is that this was said in jest, or if it was real, the MLS would shut it down. The MLSs have been tasked with enforcing these rules. If an agent wants to put a movie with the commission information on the TV screen in the living room, this is allowed. It's not in the MLS. It can be on a listing sign, it can be in an email, it can be on the doormat at the house, in a social media post. You name it, it's okay as long as it's not in the MLS. Are you actually faulting agents for creative marketing that actually complies with the rules? I'm very interested in Ms. Kamin's discussion about the data. There should be data on prices and commissions, but with the removal of the commission information in the MLS, I would like to know where companies are getting the commission data. There are only 2 places where you can find the commission. In the settlement statement that is initiated by the lender and then signed by the buyer and seller with either a lawyer or a title company. Settlement statements are not recorded with the Register of Deeds. So I want to know, where are companies getting the data, since the key piece of information, the buyer agent commission percentage, has been removed from the MLS. I wish that we had this data, but we don't. Perhaps, with larger lenders like Rocket Mortgage, with their recent purchase of Redfin, they will be able to report on what they're seeing, but it won't represent the entire market. If we're seeing reduced prices, it's because of the economy, not because of a change in commissions. Ms. Kamin spoke at length about a specific seller in Colorado trying to sell a $2.75 million house. It's true that things have changed under the new rules, but it was focused on buyer agent commissions and how they would be paid. Listing agent commissions have always been negotiable. Every agent is entitled to run their business the way that they want to. If they wouldn't negotiate on a $2.7 million house, personally, I think that they were stupid, but it's their prerogative. And if it's then the seller's choice to hire them or not. A seller recently asked me to negotiate my commission. I told him that I would not make less than a buyer's agent, and I couldn't do it for less than 4%. The house was in a high price range, so the commission was still good. Buyer agents did not take issue with the 2% commission. Due to an enormous amount of work preparing that house for sale and excellent marketing, the house went under contract in 3 days for well above asking. I asked the seller if he would consider increasing the commission to both agents given the situation, and he did. And we came up with what we thought was fair, and it was a win-win for everybody. I can't speak for Colorado. And I sure would love to talk with the Colorado agents who were interviewed by Mike Chambers. I can speak for North Carolina, and here we are complying with the rules. It is up to the individual agent if they want to negotiate. And sometimes it makes sense to negotiate, and sometimes it doesn't. The last comment about sources that allow you to put a for sale by owner in the MLS also being controlling. The entire podcast was one conspiracy after another. This is just not true. Sellers have choices, and they have ways to get around working with realtors if they don't want to. I would also love the opportunity to talk to Mr. Chambers. Mike, I hope you call me. I would really like to talk to you about what happened. There's one thing I will agree with, and this is the statement made by Debra Kamin in closing. Quote, "My number one piece of advice is to understand, even if you're told you cannot negotiate any commissions, you can negotiate on commissions. And if the agent doesn't want to, you have the right to find another agent. You also absolutely have the right to know what you are paying for and to ask questions. Okay, you're going to charge me this much money. What are you going to do for that money? Just like you would ask in any other transaction." Unquote. This statement is 100% true. And this is what is happening in the market. And if agents are not doing it and are found out, they could get into big trouble. It remains to be seen if the lawsuit is going to stimulate a sea change in how we do business. In my opinion, it is going to take being in another strong seller's market for this to happen. This would be the time for sellers to tell buyers to pay for their own agent. The slower the market is, the more that it is a buyer's market like we're in now, sellers will do many things to get their home sold, like agree to compensate a buyer's agent. Realtors are not controlling this narrative. We are complying with a complicated set of rules and doing our best to get results for both our buyers and sellers. There may be bad actors out there. They're in every business. I highly recommend that buyers and sellers interview multiple agents and ask tough questions. Find the person that will be the best fit and the best advocate for you.